Before boxed mixes lined every supermarket shelf, there was a red and white cookbook that quietly shaped American kitchens. Betty Crocker's recipes weren't just instructions, they were promises of comfort, celebration, and togetherness. Today, we're opening the faded pages to rediscover 10 forgotten dishes that once defined family dinners and church potlucks. Some sparked nationwide baking crazes, others filled tables during tight times. If you're passionate about preserving America's culinary past, subscribe and join our journey through these lost flavors. Let's step back in time and taste history again. Because some recipes deserve a second chance at the table once more today. In 1966, something unexpected happened in American kitchens. A chocolate cake so rich, so molten at its center, it nearly caused a national baking crisis. This was the legendary tunnel of fudge cake, introduced to millions after a home baker entered it into the Pillsbury Bake-Off and placed second. Yet it was the public, not the judges, who made it immortal. At a time when the post-war economy was booming and suburban kitchens were expanding, the bundt pan was still a novelty. But once this cake appeared in magazines and on Betty Crocker recipe cards, demand for bundt pans exploded almost overnight. Stores sold out. Manufacturers struggled to keep up. All for a cake that hid a secret beneath its surface. Unlike traditional layer cakes with visible frosting, the tunnel of fudge cake looked modest on the outside. A ring of deep chocolate, slightly cracked on top. But slice into it, and the center revealed a dense, glossy tunnel of fudge that flowed like velvet. It felt luxurious in an era that celebrated convenience. The magic came from a precise balance of sugar, butter, eggs, and chopped nuts, which created that molten core without any actual frosting inside. No shortcuts. No boxed pudding. Just careful measuring and patience. For families in the late 1960s, this cake became the centerpiece of birthdays, church suppers, and holiday tables. It wasn't just dessert. It was drama. The moment of slicing brought gasps. Children leaned closer. Guests asked for the recipe. Today, it's rarely baked. But one taste reminds us why it once captivated a nation. Some cakes are sweet. This one made history. In the 1970s, dinner needed to be faster. Busier schedules, growing suburbs, and the rise of convenience foods reshaped the American table. That's when Impossible Cheeseburger Pie appeared, a recipe that felt almost magical the first time it came out of the oven. The name alone sparked curiosity. Impossible. How could a pie form its own crust without anyone rolling dough? Yet that was the promise printed in Betty Crocker cookbooks and on the back of Bisquick boxes. You simply browned ground beef with onions, spread it in a pie plate, sprinkled cheese on top, and poured a thin batter of milk, eggs, and Bisquick over everything. Then you baked it. Somewhere in that oven, something curious happened. The batter settled beneath the meat, creating a soft bottom crust, while the top turned golden and firm. No layering. No pastry skills. Just one dish and faith in the process. For working mothers balancing jobs and household duties, this recipe felt like quiet reassurance. It looked homemade. It tasted familiar, savory beef, melted cheddar, tender crust, but it required very little effort. Children loved it because it tasted like a cheeseburger. Parents loved it because it meant fewer dishes in the sink. The Impossible Pie craze didn't stop at beef. There were versions with zucchini, coconut custard, even taco fillings. But the cheeseburger version became the weeknight classic, appearing at potlucks and scribbled onto recipe cards passed between neighbors. Today, it's rarely mentioned in modern food trends. Yet it represents a specific moment in American history, when innovation meant making life simpler without sacrificing comfort. It may not look glamorous, but Impossible Cheeseburger Pie captured the spirit of 1970s kitchens perfectly. There was a time when elegance shimmered on a plate, and it wobbled. In the 1950s and early 1960s, tomato aspic mold was not a joke or a curiosity. It was sophistication. It appeared at ladies' luncheons, church socials, and holiday buffets, glowing ruby red beneath the dining room lights. Made from tomato juice, unflavored gelatin, vinegar, and a careful blend of celery, onion, or even stuffed olives, the mixture was poured into decorative molds and chilled until firm. When unmolded, it held its shape like stained glass. Some versions were crowned with shrimp. Others rested on crisp lettuce leaves with a dollop of mayonnaise at the side. To modern eyes, it seems unusual. But in post-war America, gelatin symbolized progress. Refrigeration was becoming standard in homes, and molded salads reflected a new era of culinary modernity. They were tidy, controlled, and visually impressive, a far cry from the rustic dishes of earlier decades. Tomato aspic also carried practicality. It could be prepared in advance, transported easily, and sliced neatly for serving. Hostesses appreciated its reliability. Guests admired its polish. And because it was savory rather than sweet, it felt refined. Betty Crocker's cookbooks featured variations that encouraged creativity. Ring molds with seafood centers. Individual servings in teacups. Garnishes arranged like bouquets. Presentation mattered, yet taste changed. By the late 1970s, heavy casseroles and convenience snacks replaced molded salads. The aspic quietly disappeared from most tables, surviving only in handwritten recipe cards tucked into old church cookbooks. But behind its trembling surface lies a story of mid-century optimism and domestic pride. Tomato aspic wasn't just gelatin and juice. It was a symbol of an era that believed beauty could be poured into a mold and set perfectly in place. In the 1960s, American kitchens were embracing convenience with open arms. Canned goods, boxed mixes, and quick-bake ideas promised less time at the stove and more time with family. Out of that era came a dish that felt playful, practical, and perfectly suited to busy households: hot dog stuffed cornbread. At first glance, it looked like something a child might invent. Hot dogs nestled inside golden cornbread, baked together in a single pan. But this wasn't improvisation. It was printed proudly in cookbooks and promoted as a clever twist on two family favorites. The preparation was simple. A thick cornbread batter, often made with a trusted baking mix, was spread into a greased dish. Whole hot dogs were placed on top, then covered with another layer of batter. Into the oven it went. As it baked, the bread rose around the hot dogs, sealing them inside a warm, slightly sweet crust. When sliced, each piece revealed a cross-section of savory sausage wrapped in tender cornmeal bread. No separate buns. No extra steps. Just a compact, handheld dinner that children adored. This recipe reflected something deeper than convenience. It showed how American families blended tradition with modern speed. Cornbread had roots in early American cooking, while hot dogs represented urban street food and industrial food production. Together, they formed a uniquely mid-century creation. It became a staple for weeknight dinners, school lunches, and casual gatherings. Served with baked beans or coleslaw, it felt complete. And perhaps most importantly, it felt fun. Today, it rarely appears in food magazines or trendy kitchens. But hot dog stuffed cornbread captures a moment when creativity meant making familiar foods feel new again, all within the walls of a suburban oven. In the 1950s, there was a dinner that promised something extraordinary: no stirring, no complicated timing, no watching over the stove. You simply layered the ingredients, closed the oven door, and trusted the process. It was called 7-layer dinner, sometimes known as magic layer casserole, and it felt almost unbelievable the first time it worked. The method was simple but precise. Sliced potatoes formed the base. On top came raw ground beef, followed by onions, rice, canned tomatoes, and sometimes peas or carrots. Each layer remained distinct, carefully stacked like pages in a book. A final pour of tomato juice or broth ensured moisture, and then the dish was sealed and baked slowly. There was no mixing, no browning beforehand. The oven did everything. As it cooked, the flavors blended quietly. The rice absorbed the juices from the beef. The vegetables softened. The potatoes turned tender beneath it all. When it emerged, the layers were no longer separate but unified, a complete meal formed from patience and heat. This dish thrived in an era when efficiency mattered. Families were growing. Budgets were tight. Housewives needed dependable meals that could stretch ingredients without sacrificing satisfaction. 7-layer dinner delivered protein, starch, and vegetables in one pan, making cleanup mercifully simple. It also carried a sense of wonder. There was something almost ceremonial about building the layers, knowing that transformation would happen unseen. Children peeked through oven windows. The aroma slowly filled the house. Today, the recipe feels almost forgotten, overshadowed by faster methods and pre-packaged meals. But 7-layer dinner reminds us of a time when trust in the oven, and in a printed recipe card, was enough to bring a family together around a single, steaming dish. Betty Crocker's recipes weren't just instructions. They were portals to a time when cooking was both creative and comforting. From the molten magic of tunnel of fudge cake to the playful charm of porcupine meatballs, each dish tells a story of American families, mid-century kitchens, and the joy of sharing a meal. These forgotten recipes deserve more than memory. They deserve a second chance on today's tables. If you've enjoyed this journey through culinary history, subscribe and join us as we uncover more lost flavors, hidden techniques, and the heartwarming stories behind America's once beloved dishes. History tastes sweeter than you think.